In this presentation, we talk about further uses of the augmented sixth chord. In addition to the typical Italian, German, and French augmented sixth chords, there are some other uses and forms of the augmented sixth that we should know about. These include the international progression, the Swiss augmented sixth chord, the diminished third chord, and the Australian augmented sixth, which I include despite the fact that it's very questionable and really only appears in one source. To talk about the international progression, first, because so many of the chord members are shared between each of the augmented sixth chords, namely flat 6, 1, and sharp 4, here we are in C minor, it is not uncommon to see an augmented sixth chord followed by one or two other augmented sixth chords, since there's so many common tones between them. Depending on the thickness of the texture, a chord member might be omitted, most commonly scale degree 1 in the German augmented or French augmented sixths. Often this is accomplished by one voice simply moving between different scale degrees, while other voices hold the augmented sixths. Here we are in C minor. And you'll notice in the outer voices we have that augmented sixth. Lay in the bass, Fi in the uppermost voice, we can call it the soprano, and those resolve outwards as we expect them to do by creating an octave. Now the inner voice moves like this, and presumably resolving to 1. Now if we analyze this, we see that the first chord created is A flat, C, F sharp. Lay, Do, Fi, or flat 6, 1, sharp 4. That forms our Italian augmented sixth chord. Now when we leap to the E flat in that middle voice, and we have that chord member there, we have that flat 3 that's part of the German augmented sixth chord. In this instance, the scale degree 1 is left out. That's okay. It's still implying the German augmented sixth. And then we move on to scale degree 2 in that middle voice, forming a French augmented sixth chord without the tonic. So just by moving that middle voice, we're changing the augmented sixth chords. Now, it's unlikely that that composers are actually thinking of these instances as discrete chord changes. They're really just examples of voice leading. But we can refer to them if we wish, either by discussing them as discrete chords, Italian, German, and French. But we can also say that it's a quote-unquote international progression, which is the shorthand that is sometimes used by analysts when several augmented sixth chords appear one after the other. And there we are at home in C minor. Let's talk about the German doubly augmented fourth, or the Swiss augmented sixth chord. Either way that we refer to this, it will be slightly awkward. I prefer using Swiss there's a little pun there, but it's just easier to say than doubly augmented fourth. It's also a little bit confusing. If we're dealing with augmented sixth chords, I'd rather keep the terminology as similar as possible, because it's the augmented sixth that really defines these chords. So, though the name is complex, the concept is simple. The Swiss augmented sixth is simply a respelled German augmented sixth chord. In minor, German augmented sixth to cadential 6/4 involves a scale degree flat 3 being held as a common tone. Now, when we're in the major mode, the same progression yields flat 3 moving to natural 3. So let's take a look in G major here. In G major, we have German augmented sixth, which would be flat 6, scale degree 1, scale degree flat 3, and scale degree sharp 4. So there's our German augmented sixth in the first bar there, and it's moving to a 1/6/4 like we expect German augmented sixths to do. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with this voice leading, but there is one possible way that we can rewrite it that might be more idiomatic in a vocal or particularly string context. So to clarify voice leading, instead of writing that B flat to B natural, some composers will write it as a sharp 2, replacing flat 3 with sharp 2. So in the second example, we have an E flat, an A sharp, a C sharp, and a G. Sounds, when I play it on an equal tempered instrument, sounds exactly the same as the previous measure. If I play that, you can't tell me which one I'm playing, because in an equal temperament instrument, B flat and A sharp sounds exactly the same. But the voice leading is simply respelled and harmonically. Now, it gets the name doubly augmented fourth because if we measure that sharp 2 against the bass, it is a doubly augmented fourth. Let's imagine this. We've got the bass note here is E flat. A perfect fourth above E flat is A flat. An augmented fourth above E flat is A natural. So a doubly augmented fourth above E flat is A sharp. A less cumbersome way of treating this chord is Swiss augmented 6. And this is coined by Walter Piston due to the fact that the chord, and this is a little bit of a theory joke, it's a little dry, it quote unquote looks like a French but sounds like a German, hence Swiss augmented 6. Now, in this case, it looks like a French because it involves scale degree 2. But it sounds like a German because it enharmonically acts like one. You might encounter some texts that will describe this as an English or Alsatian augmented 6, but I find these to be less common terms, and personally just prefer to call it a Swiss augmented 6. Now, most of the time when we're encountering augmented 6 chords, I'd say 99% of the time, or maybe 95% of the time, but a whole bunch of the time, we find them in that traditional position that would be moving towards the sound that's like a Phrygian half cadence. So we find it with scale degree flat 6 in the bass. Now, there are some exceptions to this. One of these is listed here, and there's others, but this is the most common exception. The diminished third is simply an alternate inversion of any of the augmented sixth varieties. And so if we want to use this inversion, instead of writing Italian, German, French, or Swiss augmented sixth, we would write Italian diminished third, German diminished third, French diminished third, Swiss diminished third, and so on. And it simply results from switching which tendency tone is in the bass. Most of the time we have low 6 or lay or flat 6 in the bass. If we're in C minor, we'd have this. But if we wanted to change things around, we could put sharp 4 in the bass. Let's say we have a progression that's going up the scale. Like that, and we get to the sharp 4 in the bass. That's absolutely fine. It's just we would analyze it differently. The name results from measuring the two tendency tones against each other, just like we did in the augmented sixth version. So in an augmented sixth chord, those two tendency tones spell an augmented sixth. In the case of C minor, A flat up to F sharp. A flat's in the bass, F sharp's in one of the upper voices. But if we switch it around and put the sharp 4 in the bass, the distance between those two tendency tones is no longer an augmented sixth. It is, if we reduce it down, a diminished third. So F sharp to A flat is a third that's squished down to a diminished third. So F sharp to A is a minor third, F sharp to A flat is that diminished third. In this case, all voice leading practices still apply, and the chord still maintains the same function, just as when you invert any of the other chords. Now, let's talk about, just very briefly, the quote-unquote Australian augmented sixth chord, because this is sometimes mentioned. It's very questionable, and I would say extremely rarely occurs. Some texts, and the only one that I've found is by the Australian theorist Alex Bernard, identify one final type of augmented sixth, the quote-unquote Australian augmented sixth. I think that Bernard is pushing this analysis and his homeland. More power to him, but I don't see this mentioned anywhere else. In Bernard's text, he discusses this chord as being made up of flat 6, scale degree 7, sharp 2, and sharp 4. This chord is exceedingly rare, and this term is almost never used. But I introduce it here just so that you are aware of it, and if you find one, let me know. I'll be interested to see how your analysis works out.